You are not weak for feeling overwhelmed. You are not broken for struggling under pressure. And you are definitely not alone in this. But here's what nobody tells you. The way you've been taught to deal with stress might actually be making it worse. In the next few minutes, everything you think you know about pressure is about to shift. There's a psychologist whose ideas were so ahead of his time that most people still haven't caught up with them. His name is Alfred Adler, and the framework he built, quietly, carefully, over decades contains some of the most practical and genuinely freeing ideas about stress that have ever been put into words. Not abstract theories, not empty affirmations. Real, usable insights that change how you see yourself and the world pressing down on you. So let's start at the very beginning, with a question Adler believed was the most important one you could ever ask yourself when you're under pressure. The question is this: whose problem is this, really? It sounds almost too simple. But Adler noticed something that most of us miss completely when we're stressed. We almost always expand the problem far beyond its actual boundaries. Someone gives us a hard deadline at work, and within hours, we're convinced our entire career is on the line. A relationship hits a rough patch, and suddenly we're questioning our entire worth as a person. We take something local, one moment, one difficulty, and we make it global, make it eternal, make it about everything. Adler called this the tendency to turn situational pressure into a verdict on the self. And once you see it, you genuinely cannot unsee it. Here's a concrete example. Imagine you give a presentation and it doesn't go well. People look distracted. Your voice wavers. You lose your train of thought. The stress hits immediately, heart racing, face flushed. The awful replay beginning before you've even left the room. But then something else happens. The story starts. I'm not good at this. I never was. Everyone saw it. They all know now. One event becomes a life sentence. What Adler would gently and firmly point out is that this story is not the event. The presentation was the event. The story is something you built on top of it. And you have far more control over the story than you think. This is not toxic positivity. Adler was not interested in pretending things are fine when they aren't. He was one of the most honest thinkers of the 20th century. He believed deeply in facing reality, but he also believed that reality is often much narrower than our minds make it in moments of stress. The presentation went badly. That is real. I am a failure. That is a construction, and constructions can be revised. Stay with me, because this next part is where it gets genuinely useful. Adler developed a concept he called social interest, the idea that human beings are not isolated units battling the world alone, but deeply interconnected creatures whose well-being is tied to their sense of belonging and contribution. And what he found, through years of observation, was that stress and pressure almost always feel most crushing when we feel most alone in them. Think about the last time you were under serious pressure, whether it was financial, relational, professional, whatever it was. Notice whether the weight of it felt heavier in the moments when you were most isolated, when you hadn't talked to anyone, when you were turning it over in your mind alone at 2 in the morning. Adler would not be surprised by that at all. He believed that one of the most effective and most underused responses to stress is to widen your perspective from me. Against this problem, to us navigating this reality, not to burden others. Not to outsource your responsibility, but to remember that you exist inside a web of human connection that has always been one of the species' greatest sources of resilience. This might look like telling someone you trust that you're struggling. It might look like remembering that the person across from you at work is also carrying something invisible. It might simply look like choosing, consciously, not to disappear into yourself when the pressure builds, because isolation amplifies stress. Connection metabolizes it. And here's something that tends to catch people off guard. Adler was one of the earliest psychologists to argue that it isn't the stressful event itself that determines how much you suffer, it's the meaning you assign to it. He was saying this long before it became a mainstream idea. And what he observed was that two people can experience the exact same pressure, the same loss, the same failure, the same demand, and have entirely different physiological and emotional responses based not on what happened, but on what they decided it meant. One person loses their job and decides this is the beginning of the end. Another person loses their job and decides this is painful and disorienting and also, strangely, a door. Same event, opposite trajectories. Now, this is where people often push back. They say, I can't just decide to feel differently. That's not how emotions work, and they're right, in a way. You cannot simply choose your feelings out of thin air. But Adler's point was more subtle than that. He wasn't saying manufacture optimism. He was saying, look carefully at the meaning you're operating from, because that meaning was not handed to you by the universe. You absorbed it, built it, inherited it from experiences and relationships and 1,000 small moments. And what was built can be examined. What was built can be rebuilt. The stress doesn't go away, but its grip loosens when you realize it was partly a story and that you are also the author. Let's talk about something Adler called lifestyle, his word for the deeply personal logic each of us develops for how the world works and what we need to do to feel safe and worthwhile within it. This lifestyle forms early. It's the blueprint we're handed, or that we construct, often before we have the vocabulary to name it. Some people develop a lifestyle organized around the belief, I am only valuable when I am productive. When stress hits, this person doesn't rest. They double down, work harder, push further. Not because it helps, but because stopping feels like the most dangerous thing imaginable. The stress becomes fuel for more stress. Others develop a lifestyle organized around, I must never be seen to struggle. So when the pressure builds, they perform calm they don't feel. They present an unbroken surface. And underneath, the pressure becomes isolation, and the isolation becomes something heavier still. The extraordinary thing about Adler's framework is that it doesn't judge these responses. It simply illuminates them. Because once you can see the blueprint you've been operating from, once you can hold it up to the light and say, this is the logic I've been running on, you gain something precious. You gain the slightest, most important distance. Enough to ask, is this logic still serving me? And often, with stress especially, the answer is no. The lifestyle that got you through childhood, that kept you safe, that earned you approval, that helped you navigate an environment you couldn't control, may be exactly the thing that's making adult pressure so much heavier than it needs to be. Not because you did anything wrong, but because strategies that made sense then are being applied now in contexts where they don't fit. Recognizing this is not self-blame. 'Tis, in the deepest sense, self-compassion. Here's another thing Adler understood that the modern world is only beginning to catch up with. He believed that a great deal of human suffering, stress included, comes from an excessive focus on the self. Not selfishness exactly, more like self-absorption by necessity. A constant, anxious monitoring of how we're doing, how we're perceived, whether we're enough. He noticed that people who were most caught in this loop were also the most stressed. Not because they were narcissists, but because the self is actually a very small and unstable place to live. When everything is filtered through, what does this mean for me? How am I doing? Am I safe? Am I good enough? Every piece of pressure becomes personal. Every challenge becomes a referendum. His prescription, and he meant it literally as a prescription, was contribution. Find something, anything, to contribute to. Not because it solves the practical problem, not because it erases the stress, but because it moves the center of gravity. When you are genuinely useful to someone else, when you are genuinely part of something larger than your own survival, the pressure does not disappear, but it changes texture. It becomes more bearable, sometimes even meaningful. This is not escapism. It is physics. You cannot be fully contracted into anxiety and fully extended into contribution at the same time. The body doesn't allow it. the nervous system doesn't allow it. Adler discovered this empirically, and neuroscience has since confirmed it in ways he never could have anticipated. So what does this actually look like as a practice? It looks like noticing, in moments of high stress where your focus has gone. Has it collapsed entirely inward? Is all of your attention on the threat, the outcome, what you might lose, how you might fail? If so, that's not weakness, that's human. But it's also a signal. A signal to find one small way to reach outward. A kind word to someone. A small task completed for another person. A genuine question asked about someone else's day. These are not distractions. They are, in Adler's framework, recalibrations. They remind your nervous system that you are not alone, that you are useful, that you belong to something. And that reminder, small as it seems, does something real. We are coming toward the end of this, and I want to leave you with the thing that I think is the most quietly radical idea in all of Adler's work. He believed that courage was not the absence of fear or pressure. Courage was the willingness to act meaningfully in spite of uncertainty. He called it the courage to be imperfect. And he thought it was the single most important quality a human being could cultivate. Not brilliance, not resilience in a superhuman sense, not the ability to withstand pressure without flinching, just the willingness to show up imperfectly, to do the next right thing even when you're not sure, to let yourself be seen even when you're struggling, to try even when the outcome is genuinely uncertain. Because Adler observed, again and again, that the people most destroyed by stress were not those who faced the hardest circumstances. They were those who believed that anything less than perfect handling of those circumstances was evidence of their fundamental inadequacy. They were at war, not just with the pressure, but with themselves for feeling it. And that double battle, the stress plus the shame of the stress, was what truly exhausted people, what truly broke them down. The antidote was not perfection. It was permission. Permission to be in process. Permission to be human inside the difficulty rather than performing strength you don't currently have. You are allowed to be stressed and still fundamentally okay. You are allowed to struggle without it, meaning you are failing at life. You are allowed to be imperfect in your response to imperfect circumstances. Adler spent his career trying to give people that permission, quietly, generously, without drama. And if you take nothing else from this, take that. If this resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear this. Don't forget to like the video, and if you want more videos like this, make sure to subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.